Bibles with you, we are almost done with the book of Judges. Please don't cheer. I felt it. It has been a challenging series because of the content of the book of Judges. The book of Judges is a difficult book because it deals with difficult things. And that's such a blessing. I'm so glad that the scriptures reveal life as it is, not some utopian Pollyanna-like picture of perfection, but real men and women who are broken, who are stumbling around in the dark, who are making mistakes, because that's my reality. That's our reality, is it not? And I'm so glad that in the darkness that's revealed in that the light of God shines so brilliantly. We're going to look this morning at two chapters, starting in 17 verse 1. It says, "There was a man of the hill country of Ephraim whose name was Micah." Now this is a major change in the book of Judges. We've moved now from the description of that cycle that we've seen over and over again of Israel sinning and God judging, and then Israel crying out, and then God raising up a redeemer, a judge, a savior, a rescuer. That's done. Samson was the last one. We got 4 more chapters here, and there's 2 more stories that are told, and we're going to look at one today, and next week we'll finish it up. They're parallel stories that describe the condition of Israel as they've forgotten God. So it's going to move from judges and people of status to just ordinary, common people. So there was a man of the hill country of Ephraim. So right in the center of the nation, the hill country, Ephraim's largest tribe, significant tribe. In the book of Judges, Ephraim has been highlighted pretty well. A lot of the really good judges operated in Ephraim, and so this is central. So it's kind of just at the heart of the nation. There's this guy, and his name was Micah, and Micah means who is what God is. Who is what? It's such a great name. Who is what God is? You like it? Feel good about that now? Who is what God is? So we're starting this, and there's this kind of glimmer of hope, except it's in the book of Judges, right? So you, if you've been paying attention, you should know there's a setup here. So here's this guy, this dude in the middle of the country, and his name was Micah. Who is what God is? And so we're like, okay, maybe we're going to get a good story. And he said to his mother, the 1,100 pieces of silver that were taken from you, about which you uttered a curse. So Micah's mom was loaded, and that's a significant amount of money. It's tying back into the Samson story that we just looked at. That was 1,100 pieces of silver. Remember the 5 different leaders of the Philistine cities each gave 1,100. So anyway, she's had 1,100 pieces of silver stolen from her. So this is an incredible amount. He says, "Hey, Mom, remember that money that you got stolen from you? And you put a curse on whoever stole it? And you said that in my ears, Mom? You spoke in my ears. Behold, this silver is with me. I took it." So that Micah's a stellar dude, right? He's ripping off his mom. And he comes, and we say, well, at least he's apologizing. He's apologizing because she put a curse on whoever took it, all right? So he becomes afraid of the curse, and he's like, yeah, I did this. Mom, I took this money, and So we got to fix this, because he would have taken this curse seriously. So she says, "Blessed be my son by Yahweh." She actually uses the covenant name Yahweh. So she's like ecstatic that her son brought this back. And so in the ancient Near East, the only way to mitigate a curse that has been given is for a blessing to be given by the one that gave the curse. So she's, in essence, removing the curse from her son and putting this blessing upon him in the name of Yahweh. So again, it sounds pious, like she sounds like this woman that is trusting in God, and now the money's come back, and he restored the 1,100 pieces of silver to his mother, and his mother said, "I dedicate this silver to Yahweh. I'm going to dedicate this to Yahweh." You're like, wow, that's okay. So she must really love and trust Yahweh. She must be faithful and dedicated and excited and I dedicate the silver to the Lord from my hand for my son to make a carved image and a metal image, and therefore I'll restore it to you. So I'm going to dedicate this money to Yahweh, and to really dedicate it to Yahweh, I'm going to break the first commandment and make an idol. She's like, so like right from the beginning of the story, we have a pretty messed up family. In the heart of Israel, here's this ordinary family that on the surface claims the name of Yahweh. But when you peer a little deeper, they're broken. They're broken. And so when he restored the money to his mother took 200 pieces of silver and gave it to the silversmith, who made it into a carved image and a metal image, and it was in the house of Micah. That's an interesting little detail to me. So how much did he steal? 1,100. And how much of it did she dedicate to Yahweh? 1,100. And then how much did she spend making the idol? 200. And like nothing said about the remaining 900, if my math checks out, right? Like it's just this, and the author doesn't tell us anything about it, but he throws out these details for us to kind of get a picture of what's going on, so that you can understand this grandiose gesture. I'm going to dedicate this exorbitant amount to Yahweh because it came back to me and my son told the truth, and we're going to celebrate that by I'm dedicating all of this to Yahweh, and then I'm going to make an idol with it, with 200 of it, and who knows what happened to the rest of it. So the man, Micah, made a shrine. In the Hebrew, he makes a Bet Elohim, a house of God. He makes for himself a dwelling place of God. Think about that. It's a Tower of Babel story being redone now in the heart of Israel. God, this is where you're going to be. God, this is how you're going to be. I'm going to create a place for you. I'm going to establish. And so there, he dedicates this shrine, this house of God to Yahweh, but he puts in the heart of it a carved image that's been covered in silver. And he sets up his own shrine, and then he made an ephod, and we saw that take place earlier in the book of Judges, a religious covering that would be draped over the idol, and he made household gods. He made these other idols. They're called teraphim. They're small little household gods, ancestors and all that. So he's trying to cover all of his bases. So it's got the name Yahweh, but it looks completely Canaanite. And then he ordained one of his sons to become his priest. Become his priest. The refrain in the book of Judges, everyone did what was right in their own eyes. He's trying to create his own world. He's trying to create his own religious world. He's trying to create and constrain and make God come to him, and he's going to going to create this little environment in the name of God that has really nothing to do with God and everything to do with him. And so we see a Israelite man, an Israelite family corrupted. The narrative then moves on to the corruption of a Levitical priest. In those days, there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in his own eyes. There was a young man of Bethlehem in Judah, of the family of Judah, who was a Levite, and he sojourned there. So there's another man in this story, a young man, and that's emphasized over and over again in the text. He's young. He's currently dwelling in Bethlehem of Judah. He's a Judah, but he's a Levite. And the Levites are significant in the Israelites because if you remember the story of the golden calf, Moses is on the mountain receiving the covenant, and Aaron and the people make for themselves an idol and enter into this crazy orgy of worship. And Moses comes down and finds this taking place, and he stands up against it, and the Levites stood with Moses and destroyed the idol and brought judgment and cleansing upon the people. And because the Levites stood with Moses, God gave the Levites a special blessing. They would be a set-apart tribe among the tribes. When they got into the land, they wouldn't receive an allotment of land. They were going to serve as the priests of the kingdom of priests. And so there were 48 Levitical cities set up throughout the land, scattered, so that everywhere you were in the land, you would be close to a Levite city and to the Levites. And so the Levites served as spiritual shepherds, pastors, if you will. They were the ones that were to teach the law, to help with the worship, to offer sacrifices. The Levites were mediators between God and his people. So here's what we know about this young man. He's not named yet. He's not going to be named till the end of the story because the author's dramatic like that. He's a young man. He's in Bethlehem of Judah, which is not one of the Levite cities. Okay, so he's wandering around. And the Levites could wander around. In the law, God had said, listen, sometimes I'm going to lead you somewhere. And when I lead you somewhere as a Levite, you go there. But it's really clear who's leading who in that equation. But this young man, he's just a wanderer. Okay, so he finds himself now in Bethlehem, but he's not really there. He's just sojourning there. Doesn't really have a place. And so it says, the man departed from the town of Bethlehem in Judah to sojourn where he could find a place. That's what the English text says. But in the Hebrew, it doesn't have that, a place. It just says he came to sojourn where he could find. The dude's just looking. Doesn't even know what he's looking for. The guy who is supposed to be the mediator between God and God's people, the one who is supposed to teach and instruct and intervene and intercede for God's people, doesn't know who he is, doesn't know where he's supposed to be, doesn't know what he's about. He's just searching. And as he journeyed, he came to the hill country of Ephraim, to the house of Micah. So now these two stories come together. And Micah said to him, "Where do you come from?" And he said to him, "Well, I'm a Levite of Bethlehem in Judah, and I'm going to sojourn where I may find a place. I'm on this journey. I'm just trying to figure it all out." And Micah's an opportunist. We know this already. He sees 1,100 pieces of silver to steal. He steals it. He's not going to pass up this opportunity. So Micah said to him, "Hey, I've got an idea. Stay with me and be to me a father and a priest. Now think about how attractive that would have been to this young man who's lost. This young man who doesn't know who he is, who doesn't know where he belongs, who doesn't fit in, who's just looking for something. And now Micah says, hey, I got an idea. Why don't you stay here and be a father to me? A priest. You can imagine how attractive that would be. He says, on top of that, I'll give you 10 pieces of silver a year, and I'll give you a suit of clothes, and your living, and I'll feed you, I'll take care of you. Come and be my priest. Now, the Levite was to be God's priest. But Micah says, come and be my priest. Come and be a father to me. Come and be my priest. I'll take care of you. Who was supposed to take care of the Levites? The whole nation was, but because Yahweh was to take care of them. See, now the Levite goes in, and the Levite was content to dwell with the man. And the young man became to him like one of his sons. I love that little ironic twist. Hey, come and be a father to me. And it swells up his ego. Yeah, I'm going to be the priest. I'm going to be. And then he comes in, and he just begins to function like one of Micah's sons. And Micah ordained the Levite. What a crass and tragic statement that is. Micah ordained the Levite. The Hebrew there literally means filled his hands. Right? He filled his hands. Who is it that fills the hands of a priest? Who is it that ordains a priest? It's not Micah, but that's what he's doing. And remember, he'd already done that to his son. So think about the family dynamics we got going on now, right? So Micah's set up this shrine and this idol and this temple, and he installs his son. Hey, you're going to be the priest. And his son's, I'm the priest, and everything's good. And then here comes this Levite, and they're like, my son? Let's get a Levite. We're going to take a step up. And so now son's demoted to whatever, and here's this new Levite as the priest, and the whole thing's a mess. Micah said, now I know that Yahweh will prosper me because I have a Levite as priest. So he's trying to use God. He's trying to get God on his side rather than get himself on God's side. He's trying to control everything that only God should control. At the end of the day, he's trying to usurp and supplant God. He's trying to be God in the name of God. So sure that now he's got God's blessing. In those days, there was no king in Israel. And in those days, the tribe of the people of Dan was seeking for itself an inheritance to dwell in, for until then no inheritance among the tribes of Israel had fallen to them. So now the story takes its third twist. So we have the corruption of a man in a household. We have the corruption of a Levite and a priest. Now we're going to have the corruption of one of the entire tribes. So now it just here's the tribe of Dan. And it says they begin to seek for an inheritance. They begin to look for a place because it says, until then, no inheritance among the tribes of Israel had fallen to them, which is true and not true. So they had been given an inheritance. They had been given an allotment. They just failed to take it. In fact, the last judge that we looked at, Samson, came from the tribe of Dan. They came up against the Philistines, and they were like, hey, let's just live together. And so they didn't have that sense of place and inheritance. They didn't have that security and freedom from enemies and foreign oppression. They were given an allotment by God, and they didn't like it. And they didn't trust him enough to take it. So that's the scenario. So instead of repenting and doing what God had actually called them to do and taking the land that God had called them to take, they decide that it would be a better idea to go find another piece of land. So that's what the tribe of Dan is up to. And said, so the people of Dan sent 5 able men from the whole number of their tribe, from Zorah and from Eshtaol, to spy out the land and explore it. So it takes us back, right, to Moses sending the 12 spies into the land. They're going to send their spies out. They're going to go explore and discover and scout it out and find a really, really good place, a better place for them than the place God had given them. So they say, go explore the land. And they came to the hill country of Ephraim, and they came to the house of Micah and lodged there. So now the story's coming together. And when they were by the house of Micah, they recognized the voice of the young Levite. I find an interesting little detail. So this Levite has been wandering, sojourning around, and he spent some time in Dan. And I don't know if he sounded like Robert Kennedy Jr. or whatever, but he had a voice that was recognizable. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, so they hear him and they're like, hey, I know that guy. So they recognize, and so they turned aside and said to him, who brought you here? What are you doing in this place? What's your business here? Which sounds a little bit like an interrogation. Hey, what's going on? How'd you end up here? And he said to them, this is how Micah dealt with me. He's hired me, and I've become his priest. Which is like such a shameful statement for a Levite. But he says it with no shame. Oh, this is what's going on. Micah hired me, and now I'm his priest. Whose priest is he supposed to be? Yahweh's. And now I'm Micah's priest. And they said to him, here's what they should have said to him. What are you doing, man? You're a Levite. You don't serve Micah. You serve Yahweh. You serve all of Israel. What are you doing? Serving in this household, this shrine. I don't know if they've seen the idol yet or not, but what they should have done, and I mean, the law is really, really clear that if somebody creates an idol, if somebody creates a house of worship separate from what God has said, it's to be torn down. They're to be killed. Like, this is a big deal. But they're not doing any better than he is. So they look at him and they say, hey, well, why don't you talk to God for us? That'll help. Right? Why don't you inquire of God, please, that we may know whether the journey on which we are setting out will succeed? Hey, we'd love a blessing. Can you give us your blessing, Micah? Why don't you give us a blessing? And I love the way that the story's told. It's just like, it's so flippant. The priest said to them, go in peace. The journey on which you go is under the eye of Yahweh. Right? Like, he doesn't pray, he doesn't inquire, he doesn't do any of the things that a Levite might do to inquire of Yahweh. He just, oh yeah, you're blessed, you're good. You're good to go. And so the 5 men departed. And they came to Laish and saw the people who were there, how they lived in security after the manner of the Sidonians, quiet and unsuspecting, lacking nothing that is in the earth and possessing wealth, and how they were far from the Sidonians and had no dealings with anyone. So they go north into the most fertile area in the entire land of Israel. And they're in this beautiful, pristine valley. So this is where the headwaters of the Jordan are. They're fed by the melting snow that comes down off of the mountains and eventually leads its way into the Sea of Galilee. This is rich and lush and fertile land. And there's this city there, Laish, and they're part of the Sidonians, the Phoenicians, probably more recognizable to you. But Laish is kind of out on its own, and it's in this beautiful little secure area. Nobody's bothering it. They're wealthy and they're happy, and the Sidonians, the Phoenicians, are too far away to really help them if something goes down. So this is what the 5 spies discover. And so when they came to their brothers at Zorah and Eshtaol, their brothers said to them, "What do you report?" And they said, "Arise, and let us go up against them," which is so different than the report of the 12 spies that Moses sent out. They were too afraid to go. There were giants in the land. But now, and I think that contrast is set up on purpose. Let's go up against them. We've seen the land, and behold, it is very good. He said, "Will you do nothing? Do not be slow to go to enter in and possess the land. As soon as you go, you will come to an unsuspecting people. The land is spacious, for God has given it into your hands, a place where there is no lack of anything that is in the earth." What an outrageous statement. God's given it into your hands. God had given them land already, and they rejected it. But now these spies come back and they say, "It's so good, God must want us to have it." Well, that's a leap of logic that most of us are pretty familiar with, actually. When we want something bad enough, it's pretty easy to rationalize and justify to ourselves that God must want us to have that as much as we do. So that's where they are at. So 600 men of the tribe of Dan, armed with weapons of war, set out from Zorah and Eshtaol and went up and encamped at Kiriath Jearim in Judah. On this account, that place is called Mahanadan to this day. Behold, it is west of Kiriath Jearim. And they passed on from there to the hill country of Ephraim and came to the house of Micah. Of course they did. That's the route that the spies took. Now they're leading the army. The spies are leading the army back up. They're going to attack Laish. They're going to get their land. They're going to take it by force. So they come to the house of Micah. And the 5 men who had gone to scout out the country of Laish said to their brothers, "Hey, do you know that in these houses there's an ephod, household gods, a carved image, a metal image? Now, therefore, consider what you must do." So now we learn that the spies actually did know about the shrine, the house of God. They did know about the idols and the teraphim and the ephod. They knew that the Levite was there. And so they got 600 men with them this time. So they're like, "Hey, guys, did you know that that's what's here? So what do you want to do about that?" And they turned aside there and came to the house of the young Levite at the home of Micah and asked him about his welfare. Now the 600 men of the Danites, armed with their weapons of war, stood by the entrance of the gate. You know, when you come up to somebody and say, "Hey, how you doing?" It's one thing. When you come up to somebody and say, "Hey, how you doing?" with 600 armed warriors behind you, it's kind of a different question. Inquired about his welfare. All right. So the 5 men who had gone to scout out the land went up and entered and took the carved image and the ephod and the household gods and the metal image, while the priests stood by the entrance of the gate with the 600 men armed with the weapons of war. So here's the Levite, shaken, 600 warriors in front of them. The 5 guys go in. They scavenge the shrine. They take out the idols. They take out all the religious imagery. And when these went into Micah's house and took the carved image and the ephod and the household gods and the metal image, the priest said to them, "Hey, what are you doing?" This response is awesome. They said to him, "Keep quiet, put your hand on your mouth." Zip it, right? www.zipit.com. Just stop it, shut up, and come with us to be to us a father and a priest. Is it not better for you to be a priest to the house of one man, or to be the priest of a tribe and a clan in Israel? Vanity, vanity, vanity. He's like, "What are you doing? You're ripping off Micah. I got a good gig going on." And they're like, "Shut up. Wouldn't it be better if you were our priest? You want to be a priest for one dude and his family, or you want to be the priest for a whole tribe?" And the priest's heart was glad. So he took the ephod and the household gods and the carved image and went along with the people. So they turned and departed, putting the little ones and the livestock and the goods in front of them. And when they had gone a distance from the home of Micah, the men who were in the houses near Micah's house were called out, and they overtook the people of Dan. I love the little details in that. So they leave, but instead of having the women and the children and the livestock behind them, they move them to the front because they know that they're going to be pursued. They just ripped off Micah and his household, and they're pretty sure that they're going to come after them. And that's exactly what happens. So they're moving away, and then here comes Micah and his men, and they overtake the people of Dan, and they shouted to the people of Dan, who turned around and said to Micah, "What is the matter with you that you should come with such a company?" Man, there's no shame in this story. They're like, why would you come at us with armed men after they just robbed him? And he said, you take my gods that I made and the priest and go away? And what have I left? How then do you ask me, what is the matter with you? And the people of Dan said to him, you might want to think about what you say next. Don't let your voice be heard among us, lest angry fellows fall upon you and you lose your life with the lives of your household. They don't respond. They don't defend. They don't acknowledge that they just stole from him. They just say, hey, you might want to be quiet, because if you're not quiet, we're just going to kill you on top of it. It's the people of God. And so the people of Dan went their way. And when Micah saw that they were too strong for him, he turned and went back to his home. But the people of Dan took what Micah had made, and the priests who belonged to him. And they came to Laish, to a people quiet and unsuspecting, and struck them with the edge of the sword and burned the city with fire. This is such an upside-down reality. At the beginning of the story, we have some hope that God's people are going to be God's people. And now here we are towards the end of the story, and we're feeling bad for the Canaanites. They struck them with sword and burned the city with fire. And there was no deliverer because it was far from Sidon, and they had no dealings with anyone. It was in the valley that belongs to Beth Rehob, and they rebuilt the city, and they lived in it. And they named the city Dan, after the name of Dan, their ancestor, who was born to Israel, but the name of the city was Laish at the fur. So they just go and get their own land. Rebuild their own city, name it after their ancestor Dan, create their own life. The people of Dan set up the carved image for themselves. And now finally the Levite's going to get named. And Jonathan, the son of Gershom, son of, who's that? Moses. And his sons were priests to the tribe of the Danites until the day of the captivity of the land. Moses' grandson was the wandering Levite. And he and his sons become the priests in the tribe of Dan, sacrificing and worshiping an idol in the name of Yahweh. Let that sink in. They were priests in the tribe until the day of the captivity of the land, until the day the Assyrians came in and destroyed the northern empire, and Dan, Laish, fell. 734 BC. Hundreds of years. Hundreds of years. Moses' grandson and his children served as priests in the city of Dan, offering worship to an idol made by Micah to try to control God. So they set up Micah's carved image that he made as long as the house of God was at Shiloh, which is just It's how the story ends. It ends with this dig. Like they set up a false alternate worship. God had set up his house at Shiloh. That's where the Levites were to be. That's where the tabernacle was. That's where the Ark of the Covenant was. That's where God was to be sought and worshiped in the midst of his people. But instead, they set up their own alternate cult. And it becomes a thorn in Israelites' flesh over and over and over and over again. So, yeah, that's a fun story. Spoiler alert, the next one's worse. So I was thinking about this. What's missing from this narrative? What's missing from these two chapters, from this story of a corrupted man, a corrupted Levite, a corrupted tribe? And what's missing when you step back and look at it is God. Now, he's named, he's claimed. I'm not saying he's not there. He's always there, but he's silent. He doesn't raise up a judge, a deliverer. He doesn't send the angel of the Lord. He doesn't send a prophet or a messenger. God is letting them go their own way. And that should make you pause a little bit. And think about how we live our lives with the assumption that God must surely be on our side. Because everybody in this story was absolutely convinced that they were doing the right thing. To their core. That's the story of the book of Judges. Israel was supposed to go in and bring light to the darkness. Instead, they went in and the darkness corrupted the light. But they didn't even know it. Like Samson, who didn't know that God had departed from him. They were clueless. They claimed God's name. They did things in his name, but they didn't know the law. They didn't know the covenant. They broke it furiously. They did their own thing all the time with this deep conviction that they were good with God. And that should cause you to sit back a little bit. Because what it tells us is that corruption is subtle and profound, and nobody's beyond it. Oh, Micah, he's just some common guy in Israel. Okay, well, he could. But this Levite priest, the grandson of Moses, Dan, the entire tribe. See, corruption, man, it's sneaky and it's destructive. Israel wasn't going to be taken down by the outside, where the Philistines weren't able to topple them. The Canaanites weren't able to topple them. The sons of the desert were not able to topple them, but Israel toppled from the inside. They broke themselves. Now, I love each week to remind you how these stories of the Old Testament are pointing towards Jesus, and there's some beautiful little nuggets in this story, right? Because there was another man from the tribe of Judah that came from Bethlehem, right? There was another man of Judah, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, the long-awaited one, who was born in Bethlehem. There was another man of the tribe of Judah, another priest, another messenger who didn't become corrupted, who kept himself pure. Oh, thank God for Jesus. Because I look at this story and I'm like, man, they got so corrupted. And I don't look at that and go, what a bunch of idiots. I just look at that and go, how am I corrupted? Because here's the thing. You're blind to your blind spots by definition. Like if you could go back in time and talk to them and say, hey, how are you doing with Yahweh? They'd be like, we're awesome. Look, I got a temple with an idol. And you'd be like, dude, right? You're clear. And they'd be like, what do you mean? How am I corrupt? How are we corrupted? Without even realizing it, thinking that we're good with God, that we're doing the right thing, that God must surely be on our side, because why wouldn't he be? It just makes me thank God for Jesus and his faithfulness. Because they were corrupted. I know I've been corrupted. Y'all have been corrupted. But he was never corrupted. The perfect obedience of Jesus, the sinlessness of Jesus is so vital. It's so important. It's so significant. He wasn't just sinless so he could die on the cross. Like, his death on the cross mattered because he was sinless. Thank God for Jesus. I mean, this story, I read this story and I look at the brokenness and the confusion and the spiritual blindness, and I think, oh God, help us. Oh God, help us. Because for us to think that we're any better than they, that we can't be defiled or corrupted in that way is hubris or foolish naivety at best. It's just tragic. You know, there's this refrain over and over again. We saw it 4 times in these 2 chapters. In that time, there was no king in Israel, and everyone did what was right in their own eyes. And at first blush, it might look like the author of Judges is trying to set up the need for the monarchy. Like that what's going to come next is going to make everything right. Now, spoiler alert, it doesn't. Okay? And I don't think that's what Judges is actually doing. I think every time it says there was no king in Israel, it's an ironic statement of judgment upon Israel because Israel did have a king. God was their king. So every time it says in those days there was no king in Israel, they're saying God's rightful kingship was being rejected by his own people. And when that happens, you can make what is wrong seem right and make what is right seem wrong. And you can do it in the name of God the whole time. And if you don't see that happening in front of your eyes, I don't think you're paying much attention. Because we're seeing that in real time right now in our culture and in our country on both sides of the aisle. We can go to the right and we can have this Christian nationalism that in the name of God wants to control and conquer rather than love. And then on the left, we have God endorsing all kinds of evil and wickedness. You see the commercial, right? If Jesus were here today, he'd be an abortion doula. So you see, and it's said with such conviction, with such profound, on both sides, God's on our side. Listen, like, good for you if you think God's on your side. But here's what I know. I don't want to be on anyone's side but God's. Right? Like, this is a profound warning that we would measure ourselves, we would wrestle, we would think critically and clearly and hard about who we are and how we live and what our relationship to God really is. Is it in name only? Have we deceived ourselves? How have we been corrupted? How are we trying to use Jesus to accomplish our ends rather than be used by Jesus to accomplish his? Like, this is the issue of our day. So I want to close this morning with a text that's just been resounding in my head all week long. In the middle of chapter 2 of Paul's letter to the church in Philippi, in Philippians chapter 2, he says this. He says, "Therefore, my beloved, as you've always obeyed, so now, not only in my presence, but much more in my absence, work out your salvation with fear and trembling." Take your salvation seriously. Don't let entitlement slip in. Don't think more highly of yourself than you ought. Don't forget where you came from and the price that was paid. Don't trivialize the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus for your salvation. When you think about your salvation, when you think about your restored, renewed relationship with God, don't take it for granted. Don't be calm and pithy about it. It's a big deal. And it's got to be worked out, lived out. It's not a done deal. So Paul's in prison writing this, and he's like, "Hey, I'm not with you, and you obeyed when I was with you, but you got to obey when I'm not there, and here's what I really want you to focus on. Keep your salvation in front of you and work it out with fear and trembling." And this is not, "Am I really saved?" That's not what he's saying. But there is a sense of, I can't believe I'm saved. Because I know me. And I know what I deserve. And it's not Jesus. But that's what I got. And I don't want to take that for granted. I don't want to ever take that for granted. But I know that I do. I know that I slip. I know that I take my eyes off. And I know that I try to use them. And I know that I become corrupted. That's how, and Paul knows that. So he's like, hey, keep it in front of you. Work it out with fear and trembling. Be serious about your faith. There's nothing more important than your salvation. This, it needs to be front and center. It is the highest good. You got to work it out with fear and trembling, for it is God who works in you both to will and to work for his good pleasure. I love the balance here. Work it out with fear and trembling because it's God who does it. So this partnership, this is what we were always created for. This is what the Imago Dei means. Created to be in partnership with God, partakers of the divine nature, called to partner with God in his work of beauty and life and flourishing. So why would you take that for granted? Why would you neglect it? No. Keep it front and center. Work it out with fear and trembling because God is doing it. Why do you want to spend your time and energy on things that are done not by God? Why do you want to put your hope in something that doesn't come from God? Why would you give your life to anything other than what is wrought by God? These stories of brokenness and corruption should drive us to our knees and cause us to look to God with abandon and a righteous fervor and say, God, protect us. God, guard us. God, save us. God, rescue us. God, purify us. It says, do all things. Oh, man. You ever have a verse you don't want to read because you don't want to bring judgment upon yourself too much? Oh, this one. Doesn't say some things, doesn't say the things that you like. Do all things without grumbling or disputing. Church, hear that. Do all things without grumbling or disputing. That you may be blameless. Notice the connection there. Do all things without grumbling or disputing, that you may be blameless and innocent, pure, uncorrupted. See, there's a connection there that I don't think we always put together. Like when we grumble, when we complain, when we dispute, when we get into arguments all the time and we become argumentative and we want to become right more than we want to be righteous, what happens to us? Like so there's a couple ways you can go. You can live a life, right, of grumbling and disputing and complaining and whining and fighting and you're not going to like what you get at the end of that life. Or you can put that aside and be blameless and innocent children of God without blemish in the midst of a crooked and twisted generation. Well, I think that's an appropriate description of our time and our place and our people. Keep your salvation front and center. You keep Jesus on the throne. You put all of your hope and attention and affection towards him, and you stop your whining and your bickering and your incessant need to control and your incessant need to be right, and you trust in God's work and you do what you know he's called you to do, and all of a sudden you begin to stand out. And see, this is what drives me crazy. For the last 60, 70 years, the church in the United States has been doing everything it can to not stand out from the culture, to not be different, to be accepted, it's all done in the name of relevance. And listen, I like to be accepted as much as the next guy. I want to be liked. I like it when people like me. It's a better feeling than when people don't like me. Can we just be honest about that? Right? Like that's it. And so like I understand the impulse and I understand how this has all happened, but over the last decades and a couple of generations, we've done everything that we can to make ourselves accepted and liked by the crooked and perverse generation that God's called us to stand out and shine as lights for. We make ourselves like the world so that they'll like us, and then what do? We don't know what to do then, because now we're just like them. We're not willing to pay the price of not being liked, of being rejected, of being rebuked, of being scorned, of being mocked. But see, it's when we're rejected, it's when we're rebuked, it's when we're scoffed at that we actually shine. That the distinction, the difference, I'm not saying we're better, just saying we're different because Jesus, who is better, is in us. So why do I want to be like the world when I can be like Jesus, who is fundamentally and quantitatively better than anyone and everyone in the world combined? And we're running after the approval of the world? I want the approval of Jesus. I want to be different, not for the sake of being different, but for the sake of bringing light. I want to share in the sufferings of Christ. And I say that, and the part of me that still needs to be regenerated goes, no, don't say that. I don't want to suffer. I don't like pain. But I want to share in the sufferings of Christ. I want to know him and the power of his resurrection. I want with all my heart to be about his work. And that means I got to stop asking him to be about mine. See, we can shine. We can stand out brilliantly. Sometimes that will be attractive. And sometimes those in the darkness hate the light. But I want to be light because he is the light. Among whom you shine as lights in the world, holding fast to the word of life. So that the day of Christ I may be proud that I do not run in vain or labor in vain. Paul's heart is like, keep your salvation front and center. Don't conform yourself to the pattern of the world, but be conformed to the image of Jesus. shine the light and the beauty of Jesus every opportunity that you get. Let Jesus shine through you, even if it makes you hate it. Because there's no one and nothing like Jesus. You believe that this morning? There is no one and nothing like our Lord. Jesus is everything. May he have everything of us. Amen and amen.